If you've been told to manage your blood sugar and the only advice you've ever gotten is a long list of things to avoid, this video is going to feel different. Most blood sugar content is built entirely around restriction. Cut the sugar, cut the carbs, cut the bread, and while some of that has a place, it misses something important. There are specific foods that actively help your body manage blood sugar better, not just foods that passively avoid making it worse. Today, I'm going to walk you through 5 of them, exactly why each one works at a biological level, how much of it actually matters, and how to realistically fit them into meals you'll actually want to eat. I'll also cover 2 bonus additions worth knowing about: the myths that quietly derail most people's efforts, a simple method for building any meal so it works with your blood sugar instead of against it, and what a full day of eating built around these principles could actually look like. Let's quickly cover why this matters in the first place without turning this into a biology lecture. When you eat, carbohydrates break down into glucose, which enters your bloodstream, and your body releases insulin to help move that glucose into your cells for energy. In insulin resistance, which is the underlying issue in type 2 diabetes and prediabetes, your cells don't respond to insulin as effectively as they should, so glucose builds up in the blood instead of being used properly. The foods we're covering today work in one of a few ways. They slow down how quickly glucose enters the bloodstream, they improve how well your cells respond to insulin, or they reduce the inflammation that's known to worsen insulin resistance over time. None of these foods are a cure, and none of them replace medication if it's been prescribed. But the research behind each one is genuinely strong, and the effect of consistently including them is measurable. It's worth understanding one concept before we get into specific foods, because it explains why some of what's coming up will genuinely surprise you: glycemic index and glycemic load. Glycemic index measures how quickly a specific food raises blood sugar compared to pure glucose, on a scale that generally sorts foods into low, medium, and high categories. Glycemic load takes that a step further by factoring in a realistic portion size, which matters because a food can have a high glycemic index, but a low glycemic load if you'd only ever eat a small amount of it. Watermelon is a commonly cited example. It has a fairly high glycemic index on paper, but a typical serving contains so much water and so little actual carbohydrate that its real-world impact on blood sugar is modest. This is exactly why some foods that sound intuitively sugary, like the berries we'll cover shortly, behave far better than foods that sound intuitively safe, like a slice of white bread, which digests and converts to glucose extremely quickly, despite not tasting sweet at all. Before we get into the list, let's clear up a few myths, because these are exactly the beliefs that quietly sabotage people's progress. Myth 1: all carbs are the enemy. Not true. The type and context of the carbohydrate matters enormously. A carbohydrate eaten alongside fiber, protein, or fat behaves very differently in your bloodstream than the same carbohydrate eaten alone, because those other nutrients slow digestion and blunt the glucose spike. Myth 2: fruit is basically sugar, so it should be avoided. Also not accurate. Whole fruit comes packaged with fiber, water, and antioxidants that slow sugar absorption dramatically compared to something like fruit juice or candy. And several fruits we'll cover today are genuinely beneficial rather than harmful. Myth 3: if a food is healthy, portion size doesn't matter. Even the most beneficial foods on this list can raise blood sugar if eaten in very large quantities, so portion awareness still matters. This isn't a list of foods you can eat unlimited amounts of and expect the same benefit. Let's get into the 5 foods. The first is leafy green vegetables. Spinach, kale, collard greens, and similar dark leafy greens. These are about as close to a free food as exists for blood sugar management. And here's why. They're extremely low in carbohydrates relative to their volume, so they barely register on a blood sugar response, while being packed with fiber, magnesium, and antioxidants. Magnesium specifically plays a documented role in insulin function. People with lower magnesium levels tend to show worse insulin sensitivity, and leafy greens are one of the most accessible sources of it in a normal diet. Beyond the nutritional profile, leafy greens serve a practical function too. When they take up a large portion of your plate, they naturally displace higher glycemic foods without you having to think about restriction at all. A large spinach salad, a side of sautéed kale, or greens blended into a soup are all simple, realistic ways to include them daily. There's no meaningful downside or portion limit to worry about here, which makes this the easiest food on the entire list to build a habit around. The second is legumes, beans, lentils, and chickpeas. Legumes are one of the most well-studied foods for blood sugar management, and the mechanism is fairly straightforward. They combine a significant amount of fiber with a meaningful amount of plant-based protein, and that combination dramatically slows how quickly the carbohydrates they do contain enter the bloodstream. This is exactly the low glycemic load effect we just covered. The same amount of carbohydrate from lentils raises blood sugar far more gradually than an equivalent amount from white rice or white bread. Beyond the immediate effect, legumes have also been associated with improved long-term blood sugar control when eaten regularly, likely because of their impact on gut bacteria, which is an area of research that's expanded significantly in recent years. Practically speaking, a half cup to 1 cup serving of beans or lentils added to a meal, in a soup, a salad, alongside a main dish, or as the base of the meal itself, is a realistic, affordable, and genuinely effective habit to build. The third is fatty fish. Salmon, mackerel, sardines, and similar cold water fish. Fish itself doesn't directly lower blood sugar the way fiber-rich foods do, since it contains essentially no carbohydrates, but its role here is different and just as important. The omega-3 fatty acids in fatty fish have a well-documented anti-inflammatory effect, and chronic low-grade inflammation is one of the biological drivers that worsens insulin resistance over time. Regularly including fatty fish is associated with better long-term metabolic health markers, including improved insulin sensitivity in several studies. It also plays an important indirect role. Replacing a higher carbohydrate or processed protein source with fatty fish at a meal naturally improves the overall blood sugar impact of that meal. 2 servings a week is a commonly cited target in general dietary guidance, though this is exactly the kind of detail worth discussing with a doctor or dietitian if you're also managing other health conditions, since fish intake recommendations can shift based on individual circumstances. The fourth is berries. Blueberries, strawberries, raspberries, and blackberries specifically. This is the food on the list that surprises people most because it directly contradicts the fruit is just sugar myth we covered earlier, and it's a perfect real-world example of the glycemic load concept from a few minutes ago. Berries have one of the lowest sugar to fiber ratios of any commonly eaten fruit, meaning the fiber content meaningfully slows the absorption of the natural sugar they contain. On top of that, berries are especially rich in anthocyanins, the antioxidant compounds responsible for their deep color. And anthocyanins specifically have been linked in research to improved insulin sensitivity and reduced post-meal blood sugar spikes. A reasonable serving is around 3/4 of a cup to 1 cup, and berries work well as a topping on plain yogurt, blended into a smoothie alongside protein, or simply eaten on their own as a dessert alternative to something more processed. Frozen berries carry the same nutritional benefits as fresh and tend to be more affordable and available year-round, which makes this an easy food to keep consistently stocked. The fifth is nuts and seeds. Walnuts, almonds, chia seeds, and flaxseed in particular. Like fatty fish, nuts and seeds don't lower blood sugar directly, but they bring a combination of fiber, healthy fats, and plant protein that does two important things. It slows digestion when eaten alongside carbohydrates, and it improves satiety, meaning you stay full longer and are less likely to reach for a quick, high-sugar snack a couple hours later. Walnuts and flaxseed, in particular, contain a plant-based form of omega-3 fatty acids, adding an anti-inflammatory benefit similar to what we covered with fatty fish. Chia seeds are especially notable because they form a gel-like consistency when combined with liquid, which is thought to further slow carbohydrate digestion when eaten together in the same meal. Portion matters more here than with the other foods on this list, since nuts and seeds are calorie dense. A small handful, roughly a quarter cup or 1 to 2 tablespoons of seeds, is a reasonable daily serving that provides the benefit without excessive calorie intake. Beyond the core five, there are two commonly discussed additions worth knowing about, even though the evidence behind them is a bit more mixed than the foods above. Cinnamon, used as a regular culinary spice stirred into oatmeal, coffee, or yogurt, has been studied for its potential to modestly improve insulin sensitivity, though study results vary and the effect appears fairly small compared to the five foods we just covered. It's a low-risk, pleasant addition as part of a normal diet, but it isn't a substitute for anything else discussed today. Vinegar, particularly apple cider vinegar, has similarly been studied for a modest blunting effect on blood sugar when consumed as part of a meal, likely related to how it affects the speed of stomach emptying. As with cinnamon, think of this as a small food-based addition rather than a centerpiece strategy. And if you have any digestive conditions, reflux, or are on medications that affect the stomach, it's worth checking with a doctor before making it a regular habit, since vinegar's acidity isn't neutral for everyone. Now, knowing these foods matters less than actually knowing how to build them into real meals. So let's talk about that. A simple and well-supported approach is often called the plate method. Picture your plate divided into sections, roughly half filled with non-starchy vegetables, including leafy greens, a quarter filled with a lean protein source, which could include fatty fish, and a quarter filled with a carbohydrate source, ideally one that includes legumes or a whole grain rather than a refined one. Nuts and seeds and berries fit naturally as toppings, snacks, or dessert components around that base structure. This approach works because it automatically builds in fiber and protein alongside any carbohydrates you eat, which is the exact mechanism that blunts blood sugar spikes. You don't need to memorize glycemic index charts or weigh ingredients if the overall structure of the meal is already working in your favor. To make this even more concrete, Here's what a full day built around these principles might realistically look like. Breakfast could be plain Greek yogurt topped with a mix of berries and a tablespoon of chopped walnuts, paired with a sprinkle of chickpeas or lentils, some grilled salmon or another lean protein, and a simple olive oil based dressing. Vegetables making up most of the plate, with legumes and protein providing the staying power. A mid afternoon snack could be a small handful of almonds alongside a piece of whole fruit, which pairs a healthy fat with natural sugar to prevent the kind of spike that fruit alone might cause on an empty stomach. Dinner could center on baked mackerel or another fatty fish, a generous side of roasted or sautéed leafy greens, and a modest portion of a whole grain like quinoa or brown rice, rounding out the day with another anti-inflammatory, fiber-forward meal. None of this requires special ingredients or complicated recipes. It's largely about rearranging familiar foods into a structure that consistently works in your favor. Timing and activity matter here too, and this is a piece that often gets left out of nutrition-focused content entirely. Going long stretches without eating and then eating a large meal tends to produce a bigger blood sugar spike than smaller, more evenly spaced meals throughout the day. And one of the simplest, most well supported habits for blood sugar management has nothing to do with food at all. A short walk, even just 10 to 15 minutes after a meal, has been shown to meaningfully reduce the blood sugar spike that follows eating because your muscles use glucose for fuel during activity, pulling it out of the bloodstream directly. This doesn't need to be intense exercise. A relaxed walk around the block after dinner is enough to make a measurable difference. And it's one of the easiest habits on this entire list to start today with zero cost and no dietary change required at all. Let's also talk about a few practical mistakes that undercut these benefits, even when people are including the right foods. The first is drinking calories instead of eating them. A smoothie packed with fruit, but no protein or fat to slow it down, can spike blood sugar just as fast as a sugary drink, even if every ingredient in it is technically healthy. Adding a source of protein, like Greek yogurt or a scoop of protein powder, or a source of fat, like nut butter or chia seeds, fixes this. The second mistake is eating carbohydrates in isolation. A plain bowl of cereal, a piece of toast with nothing on it, or fruit eaten completely alone will raise blood sugar faster than the same food eaten alongside protein or fat. The fix here isn't avoiding the carbohydrate, it's pairing it with something else on this list. The third mistake is meal timing extremes, which we just covered. And the fourth is one that catches even careful eaters off guard: hidden sugar in foods that don't taste sweet at all. Pasta sauces, flavored yogurts marketed as healthy, salad dressings, and many packaged breads and granola products often contain significant added sugar. Reading the ingredient label rather than trusting the front of package marketing and watching for added sugar specifically on the nutrition facts panel catches a surprising number of hidden sources that can otherwise undo the benefit of everything else you're doing right. I also want to be direct about something. Food choices matter, and the research behind these 5 foods is genuinely strong. But food alone doesn't replace medical management for diabetes or prediabetes. If you're on medication, these dietary changes can meaningfully support what that medication is doing. And in some cases, under a doctor's supervision, dietary changes have allowed people to work with their doctor toward reduced medication needs over time. But that's a conversation to have with your physician, never a decision to make unilaterally. especially since some of these foods, legumes and high fiber foods in particular, can affect how well certain medications are absorbed if introduced too quickly or in very large amounts. If you're managing diabetes or prediabetes and haven't spoken with a registered dietitian, that's genuinely one of the most useful next steps you can take, beyond anything covered in this video, since a dietitian can tailor these general principles to your specific labs, medications, and preferences. To bring this together, leafy greens, for their almost negligible impact on blood sugar and strong magnesium content, legumes, for their fiber-protein combination that slows glucose absorption, fatty fish, for its anti-inflammatory support of insulin sensitivity, berries, for proving that not all fruit needs to be feared, and nuts and seeds for the combination of healthy fats, fiber, and satiety that helps every meal around them behave better, with cinnamon, vinegar, and a short walk after eating as small, low-effort additions worth knowing about. None of these require a complete diet overhaul. Even adding 2 or 3 of them consistently, built around a simple plate structure, produces a real, measurable difference over time. If this video was useful, the most helpful thing you can do is share it with someone managing their blood sugar, who's only ever been told what to avoid, never what to add. Subscribe for more evidence-based health content, and I'll see you in the next one.